Hi there, everybody. Hi there, Matt. Hi, everybody.
Hey, how you doing, Joe?
I'm doing fine, thanks, except my countdown's not working in very well. And here's Brandy. Hey, Brandy.
Hate that.
Hey.
Folks, this is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joan Firestone. I am joined by Matt Waldie, my good friend, and an expert on the end of neoliberalism, and another expert on the end of neoliberalism, my good friend Brandy Weaver has joined us as well. And we expect to be joined also very soon by Dee Peers, the co-host. There is Dee right there.
There she is.
And Dee is the co-host, as is Brandy, of Around the World with Brandy and Dee.
Yes, that's us.
Whose show we just were on. So tonight's topic is part 2 of how will people in the U.S. react to the end of neoliberalism? And we had a number of speculations last week. The topic was very interesting. At that time, we decided that this week we would talk more specifically about the signs and signals that make us think that we're coming to the end, of neoliberalism. So who'd like to pitch in on
that? I can go.
Go ahead.
But I wasn't here last week, so I'm not exactly sure where you guys left off. But the signs of the end of neoliberalism probably, for me, began recognized them to be the death throes back in 2016. That's when the elections weren't as apparently unfixed or democratic as they were once thought before that period of time by the majority. I'm sure there's many of us who knew that where it was already, but there was a larger amount of people who understood that there was a issue with the electoral process. And that's a clear sign that the information wasn't being held as tightly as it used to be. So there were, in my opinion, factions in the neoliberal oligarchy that were fighting amongst each other that were causing that.
Yeah,
and that continued.
And you think this is one sign of the end, of neoliberalism?
It's a schism in the oligarchy.
Okay, Brandy?
I think I kind of agree with Matt, but I don't just put it at only 2016. I think seeing people lose faith in their government to the point to where they don't vote at all, which is something that we watched happen here in our state. And I've gone over the history in the past of how Arkansas became a red state, because at one time it was very blue and then it was purple. And now 50% of the state doesn't vote. And that's how we have the representation that we have, because they have no faith in either party.
So when did Arkansas become purple?
I think it became purple like back in the 90s, because I remember I'd have to look back over the maps that I pulled up that one time on your stream, but I remember having both, Democrat and Republican representatives at the same time.
So you think it became purple in Bill Clinton's time?
Like while Bill Clinton was president.
Was it turning purple when he was governor?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look back at the maps, but I know that he overwhelmingly won the state of Arkansas, even with the things that we knew about him. And then when I think the Monica Lewinsky issue came out, a lot of the other issues came out that happened when he was governor. And that's when people were like, oh, because Arkansas is still very much Bible Belt. And that's when the rape accusations came out.
Okay,
That happened
I
at the time
remember
when he was governor.
Blanche Lincoln.
Yeah, I remember Blanche Lincoln too.
As the senator from Arkansas. She was extremely neoliberal.
Yeah, and she was a Democrat, but she was a very right-leaning Democrat.
Very right-leaning Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Dino.
Yeah. And now that
is the expression a Dino or a Dino?
Or I call it Dino, but Dino's probably more accurate.
I think it's Dino. And
store.
Yeah, I do a Dino as Flintstones.
because what they call the Republicans, that the Republicans consider, or Republican voters consider to be fake Republicans, they call them rhinos.
Yep. Republican in name only.
Yep. And that's pronounced rhino. So I'm guessing it's Dino.
We have kind of a similar situation here in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
We had a situation where the state seemed to be moving left towards the Democrats, over a period of time. And then the state was dominated by Mark Warner and then further by Tim Kaine. And people thought they were voting more lefty by voting for those two. And of course, once they got into the Senate, we see that they are dinos also. And not only that, the Democrats lost control of the governorship here to, I'll call them quasi-Trumpites. Youngkin was supposed to be a Trumpite, but he comes out of the Calvert group, which over the years was very well connected with the Bushies until he ran for governor of this state. I think he was always thought of as a Bushie and not as a Trumpist. But okay, what are some of the other signs of the end, of neoliberalism? I suppose I should say something here. From my point of view, one of the major signs of the end of neoliberalism has been the spread of MMT ideas.
Yeah.
When I first got interested in MMT in 2009, late 2009 and early 2000, 2010, almost nobody knew about MMT, and especially in the federal government. I don't think even Bernie Sanders knew about MMT in 2009, okay, or 2010. Of course, to have people recognize MMT has been happening slowly because now it's, 13 years later. But it's definitely true that a lot of members of Congress have heard about MMT and know certain things about MMT that are in complete contradiction with the ideology of the Peterson Foundation and the group, okay, of NGOs that surround and think tanks that surround the Peterson Foundation. The ecology of organizations set up in the Washington area and partly in New York also to spread the ideology, okay, of neoliberalism and the ideas of the Washington Consensus.
Have you guys said what that is? Because it's a very concise ideology that gets confused a lot with a lot of other ideologies. Because it's really just to say that all government services need to be turned into private for-profit businesses.
Mm-hmm.
It does say that, but that's maybe a little too concise.
Oh, I just saying that was the whole beginning point, or the whole idea behind the Chile experiment, was to change that and then do it in the United States. It was when the coupling, to me, with the coupling of neoconservatism with neoliberalism, is when we put it on steroids, which was Milton Friedman and the whole Chicago. They were completely in league with the, I'm going to say it, I'm trying not to use the NAZI word, but that faction, that party that was in the United States, because that really started neoconservatism in the United States, in its modern form, found it, hey, if they turn everything into a private company control, that means we don't have to worry about oversight from the public anymore. And that goes along with corporatism, which is a fascist ideology. So neoliberalism automatically became a fascist ideology by the mere fact of pulling the government services out of public purpose spending and putting it into for-profit businesses that quite often were profitable because of the government spending to them, like private prisons and those kind of things.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I think another sign of the collapse was the 2008 housing.
Yeah. Well,
collapse.
that was clearly the for me, that was if you look at it from I think from an economic standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
they had to manipulate markets from then on.
Yeah.
That was and before they'd done that, they did that briefly, but at that point on, there was nothing but manipulation of markets. That was the whole point of the insurance scam, was because they needed to, turn medicine and from just being a private pharma banquet into an insurance banquet. And because the insurance companies make way more money now after that, the so-called CARE Act, than they did before, and it's more entrenched. It's harder to get rid of.
So why are these signs of the end of neoliberalism as opposed to the victory, of neoliberalism?
Because
for everything else,
it's waking people up to the cracks in the system. So like the housing market crash in 2008, then you had people protesting against Wall Street, the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Yes.
And instead of bailing people out, they were bailing out the banks. they were more worried about the collapse of the bank than the collapse of the people. And
Yeah,
then
they
we've
were
continued to
more
see
worried
that.
about bank profits
Yeah.
than they were about the well-being of the people
Citizens.
in the housing market.
Mm-hmm.
And they bailed out everybody except for the people,
Yep. And
especially
QE,
the homeowners.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
all market manipulation. That's what I consider that.
Yeah. And
All
we see
market interference
Yep.
by the government on behalf of a particular class of people
Yes.
favored by the neoliberals.
I'll go even further to say a particular class of race and not just. It was definitely white upper class that was chosen. That was the same group that was chosen, in Nazi Germany, because it's the same group that is controlling it. And now that I say that, and I know that some people might think it's some kind of conspiracy theory, but there is a clear chain of of custody that goes through to that point. And I'm not saying that they can completely replicate it, the ideology. That's not accurate, because we have large, Jewish populations that are very much in that socioeconomic class and have that standing. It's not geared, there are definitely African Americans that have that class and that standing. So it isn't completely, cloistered into one race, but the push down is very clearly a class, a race issue, and they are definitely using that to pit us against each other as much as possible.
Yeah, the majority of the people who lost their homes, like completely outright lost their homes, the majority of them were poor Black.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a fact, whether people like it or not. And it's because the loans were more targeted towards poor Black.
Right. And they were loans that were unjustified, to begin with. They were not really justified in terms of the true values of the properties, because the class of housing assessors that was supposed to assess the value of the homes and whether that value would be able to support the loans, that group of people was corrupted essentially by bribery during that period of time. And they were basically bought into overvaluing the properties that were the collateral for the mortgages.
Yeah, and now we're just up to 2008, and then going into 2010 and 2012, and then you go to 2016, and everybody considers that. I mean, I consider that a revealing, but actually an attempt to maintain control. Hillary Clinton's candidacy was, really going towards the neoconservatives' wish to control the markets in the world, the global market, right? While Donald Trump was clearly a way of taking control and bringing authoritarianism as a mainstream acceptable form of government that is both, completely autocratic in its intent, but also has the backing of the people in a sense that they're changing the system because the people asked for it, right? He's taken that rhetoric and completely turned himself into I call it planned opposition, right? So that they could bring in an authoritarian government under the guise that this was repairing the system making America great again, that they were going to wipe out all the, of course, he did none of that. He actually supported, they say, well, he didn't spend as much money on the war. Well, that's not true. He transferred all that money into an entirely new militarized space program and just changed the people that got more money. And of course, built up, continued to build up Ukraine war. And I've heard lots of things from that. They wanted the next president to come in, at a point that the next Democrat president to come in at a point when this Ukraine war would be possible to halt the progress of Russia and China. That's far-fetched, because then we had the COVID, which really is and neoliberalism has no answer to that type of situation, and anybody who does have an answer for it in the world will be called, authoritarian, will be called, all these different names, whatever they can, communist, whatever they can think that is going to be lowering of their stature, because countries that dealt with this properly actually shut down.
Yeah.
And even if it was billions of people.
Well, and they funded them too.
Oh, they made sure that, yes.
They made sure that they kept their home, they kept their utilities on, they were fed, everything. Whereas we were completely different.
Yeah, we decided to use it as a political football.
Yeah.
So while Trump was in office during the first part, they made sure that the drive was to, build up the right as anti-vaccine, building up these covert. And I'm not saying there isn't truths, because there's always truths in all of these
conspiracy theories.
Yeah, there's always a truth in there.
Yeah.
So I'm not, but they, and then the left was completely, blaming of the right for not being able to get to the point where we could open up. And then once a Democrat supposedly came into office, all of a sudden we now needed to open up because, hey, it's okay. We have to get moving, and yet, when we look at the statistics and the deaths, there were a lot more deaths when we opened up than any, and that's the way it goes. And because we didn't close down and shut down properly, and we didn't come back properly.
And, another point I'm going to make, one, Trump was the white savior.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he was.
Yep.
Number two, with the pandemic, the people who were able to shut down, like we were able to stay home. I did wind up quitting my job, but I'd gotten sick and didn't have a choice in it. But it didn't cause us to lose our home.
Yeah.
We were able to survive it, financially stable enough. Whereas a lot of people were not able to survive it if they lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And so you wound up with the majority, and it was still a class issue. The majority of the people who were able to stay home were middle class and up.
Yep.
And we're seeing the diminishing of the middle class over time.
So here's why I'm wondering whether we're seeing the end of it. Well, I agree with everything you said about all the cracks that have appeared and all of the failures of neoliberalism that are there for people to see. It's also true that what did people do in 2020? They went and voted for a neoliberal.
Yeah.
Right? And this neoliberal is a particularly stupid and incompetent version of neoliberalism. Okay. And
I get where you're going with that, and of course, I have a different idea about that. I don't know how much choice we had, is what I'm getting at in this one. I think it was well controlled because COVID allowed them a lot more room to control the outcomes.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
controlled, but basically, here we are. We're going through the primaries, and in spite of cheating, okay, and the manipulation of some of
Mm-hmm.
the votes, as in New Hampshire, for example, and Iowa,
Yeah.
still a situation where Bernie Sanders is slaughtering everybody else.
He was in the lead, but we knew before Super Tuesday that
But
once Super Tuesday hit, something could change and shift.
here comes South Carolina, though.
And we were worried about Texas
And
because they were.
people in South Carolina
Mhm.
absolutely blindly follow the neoliberal Clyburn.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, why? How
And
does this indicate that we're nearing the end of neoliberalism? People who've been victimized for a generation by Jim Clyburn and his stupid economic policies are blindly voting for who he says they ought to vote for. I mean, really,
it's
how stupid can people be? How blind can they be? How ignorant can they be? And what does this blindness and stupidity and ignorance portend for the end of neoliberalism? Then
and Joe.
O'Brien comes in and gets people to come together around the idea of defeating Bernie Sanders, and that's fine. But why do blacks in Texas, why do they pay attention to him? Why do some of the Hispanics pay any attention to what's going on? Why can't people see that the only person who's going to work for them who was nominated was Bernie Sanders? What accounts for the total blindness? And if you say that, well, it's the media was brainwashing everybody, there's a lot to that.
There is.
Point is, if the media has the power to brainwash everybody in this way, how are we seeing the end of neoliberalism? Because the media is there full bore defending neoliberalism, embodying neoliberalism.
Because people are waking up from their suffering. But I want to point out to you, it's not just them. In Arkansas, in the primaries, Bernie Sanders won our county and one other county. The rest of the state was won by Biden.
Yep.
And to point out, the little state-ran media put on NPR's Twitter yesterday, John Brummett from NPR was traveling around our state to the Democrat meetings, telling everybody that the only person who could beat Trump was Biden, and there were still over almost 20 people in the race. John Brummett, who works for NPR,
Yes.
was traveling around to all the senior Dems who worship him.
Right.
And convincing them to vote for Biden.
And that kind of crap was going on not only in Arkansas, but all over the country.
All over
the country that was going on.
So it wasn't just Clyburn.
But again, that speaks to the point of,
Mm-hmm.
don't we still see the power of the neoliberals in spite of all their failures? And how much power is there? Is the power sufficient to maintain the domination of neoliberalism in spite of all its failures? I mean, look how people are suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Neoliberalism will not fail from an election.
No.
And it will also not fail from a domestic issue. It is going to be international pressure that will change the United States. Because they're going to have to adjust their trade policies to fit the rest of the world, which is becoming socialist.
Okay.
That could take 20 years.
Okay, let's address that. first of all, if it takes 20 years, it means the end of neoliberalism isn't at hand. But
Well, okay, so
It's in process.
apart from that, let me introduce some other thinking here. Okay. Okay. Here we are. Yes, there are other nations we're dealing with who are socialist, ideologically seem to be socialist, and they're accruing a lot of power, and we can see this, a lot of economic power. And we're seeing it manifesting itself now in the attempt to overthrow the dollar as the reserve currency and to create another international reserve currency that doesn't involve, the dollar.
I don't know why it would involve the dollar. They would not bar the dollar. That I don't believe that matters. That's not the issue. It's the example of becoming the world power. It's the example that the rest of the population needs to see in order to stop because I think the most pervasive reason why neoliberalism has lasted so long is the Red Scare.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think there's much to that. Okay, I agree with that. Even part of the opposition to Bernie Sanders was about the Red Scare.
Oh, and he was not at all. He was not
communist. Nowhere near. No,
he is not a socialist. I mean, he's a staunch FDR Democrat who, in retrospect, FDR left plenty of holes to create the divisions and the problems that we had today when he had a chance to change them, because he did believe in capitalism too much. And I honestly think that China is great. I mean, we're going to look at China as an example. We're going to see Russia probably turn more and more towards because they really already are. A lot of state-run and owned things are in Russia, but I think it's Mexico. I think it's going to be Mexico and South America's economic success over the next 10 years that is going to change the United States internally. And I think that's why we're seeing more and more anger towards the South and Mexico and the Southern Hemisphere.
And another thing.
Let's consider though, they're moving to replace the dollar as the reserve currency. From my point of view, that's good.
It is. It's good for domestic. But it's not a bad thing.
They're looking to replace it with another reserve currency.
Maybe.
Look at this for a minute. Yeah,
maybe.
But there's a lot of talk about that.
There is.
That way.
It's not coming from China as much as I thought it was, though.
It's not coming from China as much, but
it's coming from Russia.
From Russia.
In India.
Brazil. Brazil and Lula.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Brazil is talking about.
The original BRICS people are about replacing the reserve currency with another reserve currency.
Yeah.
Yeah, China's more on the electronic.
Yes,
route.
They are.
Okay, let's kind of look at this from the MMT point of view. The MMT people argue, Randy Ray, argues that really the reserve currency it's not important if you have the reserve currency or don't have the reserve currency.
No, Japan.
Okay, as long as the reserve currency is freely available to everyone so they can buy it on the open market.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the problems that was going on with the dollar was that for various reasons, it was getting very expensive for various countries to buy it on the open market. The dollar was not as plentiful as developing nations needed. So as a reserve currency, it was burdening the developing countries to have
sanctions.
the dollar as the reserve currency. And that's a lot of what's behind this.
Yep.
Okay, but
and it's beyond the point of, but it's beyond the point of return at this point, because we are so
here or there. That's not what I'm saying. what I'm saying is, you've got one reserve currency which was burdening people and which was holding back progress in the international system because it was too scarce. And now here come the BRICS nations. They're going to put in another reserve currency. And some of them have been talking about basing this new reserve currency on gold and raw materials.
Yeah, but those are the countries that would be saying that, right? Like Russia is really the main one that's talking about gold. The other country, but let's just say that happens. I'm not going to. It still matters on who is the major import country, right? That's the one that's going to spread their currency. Even if you have a BRICS currency, the one that's going to give the most to it is the one that is importing the most, right? So right now, that was, that's why the United States was. I mean, we can talk about the oil and OPEC and forcing countries into holding reserves in U.S. dollars in order to buy energy, which was a militarizing of the U.S. dollar that is gone. I mean, it evaporated really quickly. But it's the imports that drive dollars out into the world, right, onto the globe that people use, because the truth is if they have dollars, those dollars are only good for goods and services inside the United States that go into our economy. So China and the yuan is going to take over that within the next 5 to 10 years. They will be the major import, and because they're balancing their exports with their imports, they're actually maintaining something that, if they're going to go through BRICS, doesn't require a gold, doesn't require anything, because they're able to control both sides. They're going to have an export and an import. That means they're going to need money and they're going to spend money. So it almost becomes necessary just in name to call it BRICS, when it's technically going to be China. That's how I see it. I know that somebody may put a gold behind it and say like that, but that's just going to mean that China's going to hold more gold than everybody else.
If China holds more gold than anybody else, we know gold is scarce.
Yeah, it's going to cause wars.
There are going to be, not only will it cause wars, it's going to cause depressions.
Yes.
It's going to cause austerity.
Yes.
Because the scarcity of gold is going to cause austerity.
But there's three that they're talking about, not just gold.
What is the major thing that austerity supports? It is neoliberalism.
It is, but there are three things that they're planning on this India and Russia mainly, and Brazil are talking about. They're talking about gold, lithium, and petrol, oil. So that's why OPEC nations are involved. Those are the three things, or energy. Those are the three things they want to back. They don't want to back just from one metal. So even if they do that, I still don't believe at the point when they're going to even talk about bringing in a BRICS currency with a bag. I just don't see a need to coerce the levels in the world with a reserve of petrol or lithium, or there are going to be other reasons, and they're all going to be based on the fact that the exports are going to dwindle a bit from China and the imports are going to increase. So we're going to have more and more yuan put into the system.
Right. But here's my issue. I don't have an issue with more and more yuan coming into the system, or more and more of anything coming into the system.
Yeah.
What I have an issue with is the idea of the reserve currency itself. From an MMT point of view, isn't it better to have no reserve currency, but just an international free market of different currencies flowing to and fro?
Yeah.
And the value of these currencies being determined by the market. In other words, everybody's currency being acceptable for transactions. No currency not being acceptable.
No, I don't disagree.
The ideal situation we really want for the international system from an MMT point of view. If that's true, then to the extent that BRICS departs from such an ideal, to that extent, they're preparing the way for austerity and for support of neoliberal budget policies around the world, which would be a disaster in my view.
But I'm not as, I'm sorry, Brandy. I'm just
You're
not as
fine.
expected. I'm not expecting that, because once the engine starts going, right, and it's already starting to go, the point at which they would, because you only do that when you want to control, right? Right now, they're not into controlling. They're trying to get as many people into the system. And at that point, China is going to want to grow. They aren't going to want to control. Even they're going to want the United States to just desperately be involved. And that is not going to allow for a gold or any standard or anything else. I think that's just old thinking. I don't think they realize what they've got. And I think China does realize what it has.
Okay, they may, and I sure hope they do, because that would be a very important thing.
Okay,
But
you're right.
okay, from the MMT point of view, what we want is for every nation to be a monetary sovereign.
Yes.
And if every nation is going to be a monetary sovereign, its currency has to be acceptable across the whole world.
And what is China's
free
main deal? Oh, that's, China's stated deal is sovereignty above all.
Mm-hmm.
So I honestly think that they already know this.
That would be the end of neoliberalism.
Yeah.
That would be the end of neoliberalism.
If we could get there.
Yes.
What I was going to say is also with China and Russia and them getting involved in all the countries in Africa, in Central and Latin America, what that's doing is building those countries up. So China and Russia are leading this by example of what we should be doing instead of what the U.S. has been doing, which has been raging warfare and bombing. And so they're winning the bees with honey, pretty much, over to their frame of thought. And waking people up at the same time because we're watching. Because we see the wrath of what neoliberalism has done to our country. We see the wreckage it's in. And so I posted a video in the chat, and I posted it because it explains the difference and the issue with democratic socialism. So, like, democratic socialism is what we see in the majority of Europe. But it explains to where even that system is not good enough because they use the labor of these poorer countries to make the money to be able to profit so that their people can live off of.
Yes.
But they're still taking advantage of somebody else to do that.
And their democratic socialist systems have been permeated and undermined by neoliberalism. And that is all through Europe right now.
Yeah. And so what we want is not the European model, because you're still stepping on somebody else to get there.
Yep.
We want a system that's truly equal to where we're not stepping on each other.
Yes. And I think personally, unfortunately, that Sanders' form of government was going to lead towards that. I believe that's the same with Corbyn. I believe that is also more of this type of incremental supposed change, even though I know people look at him like he's radical, but it's actually just an incremental change to allow neoliberalism to continue on down the road. And form.
Bernie's not radical.
No, and he was, there, and that's the reason why he was allowed to run. I'm just gonna leave it like that, because he wasn't going to fundamentally kill neoliberalism with any of the policies that he's saying, even though they feel that way. You want to believe, but that's not how neoliberalism is going to end. We just explained how neoliberalism is going to end.
And Second Thought's a good channel for learning about
Oh, yeah.
a lot of what's going on politically here.
Good.
So as well, I just want to recommend that.
I'm sorry, you want to recommend what?
Second Thought, I posted a video in the chat that
Okay.
they did on democratic socialism, explaining the issues with it. And they're more towards our side
Mhm.
of the left. So they explain how, countries like Denmark take advantage of countries in South and Latin America by paying them lower wages instead of a
Mhm.
fair wage, so that they've got the money to take care of their people.
Yeah,
And
we
so,
do it. Even countries without a lot of immigration will pick out a subsector of their population and do the same thing.
yeah.
We do that right now in the United States.
Mhm.
That's part of the Jim Crow laws and
Yeah.
pushing down racially. Especially Hispanic in that respect, when they make up close to 30% or over 30% of the population.
Yeah.
The amount of
Puerto
power,
Ricans,
the power they have is
Marshallese.
unbelievable. Recognition of how racist our country is, that they don't hold much more power in this country. Only in certain sections of the country do they hold that power, and that's ludicrous. Neoliberalism will fail because of the international community
Example.
forcing them. Yeah, because the example and the oligarchy will automatically have a hit money-wise. The reason why they're pushing so hard to maintain the so-called New World Order is because that maintains their profit margins and domestically in order to control the country. They need that, and they need the support of the rest of the oligarchy. And I say that I know that there is no real oligarchy in Africa that's actually controlled, right? India's is very all over the place. There is one, but it isn't as in control. China had one, but they got rid of it, and because they were able to take their money and whoever wasn't under control. Russia went through and this is the one thing I can say about Putin that may be not so good. He killed them and he kicked them out. So he didn't, if they weren't willing to leave, then he had them killed.
Well,
and that's one way of dealing with it. Not a way I would want to, but anyway, that's the level of push. Unfortunately, that.
But in Putin's case, though, some of them he bribed.
Oh yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. If they weren't willing to be bribed, or leave the country with their money, or there's quite a few still there that work well within the system, but there was no doubt, and that you either worked with, and this was been 5 years now, you either in the system or you're goodbye.
Well,
Mexico's doing the same thing right now. By the way, I'm just going to lay that on the line. That's what the cartels is.
Putin just basically, there's still a lot of corporatism in Russia, but Putin just basically stepped in and said, I'm doing this. You can either go along with it or get out of my way.
Oh, and he said if they have their shot, they would kill him. They would kill their government. It was a kill or be killed, is what he put it.
Yeah. So it's either get out of the way and go, or abide by my rules, or if you're going to fight back, this is what's going to happen to you. And I think that's honestly been the truth of the way just about any of them and that's why America vilifies communists.
Okay, so question. In your views, has Putin gotten rid of all vestiges of neoliberalism in his budgeting process?
Oh, no. Oligarchy loves neoliberalism to a large extent. It's like I said, it's a fascist state. It's a form of fascist economics that can be controlled with either authoritarianism or an oligarchy. That's, you know, to a republic to one
So you
extent
think
or another.
that's what's happened in Russia, is that it's control through the authoritarian model.
Yes, but don't mistake.
Model.
But we mistake Putin as being an all-powerful, dictator type autocrat.
No,
He's not.
No, he's not.
No, he's a part of a movement.
A part of a movement, and he's running a collective leadership. That's obvious.
Yes. If he is killed, there are 10 others that are even more fervent than he is, and then another 100 others that are, this is not it. It's not weak. It's a very deep. The entire Duma is completely in lockstep. That's like saying everybody was in lockstep with Trump in the Congress, right?
Right. And you think a similar situation is occurring in China?
Oh no, I don't. China's
similar.
No. China's we misrepresent them as an autocracy. That is the people in the country. 92% think that they are democratic. They believe that they are a democracy. I don't care if you think if you can show that you are or not. If that amount of your people believe that you are, then you are. So because that means they feel they have power. And that's really the whole point of democracy, is that you feel you're represented and have
power. So you don't think that Xi Jinping has autocratic control over China?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I don't see that. And I know that a lot of people say, well, what about this? What about that? And I'm just, the regions are autonomous. There are some regions there that have an entire government set up that only have relays. Hong Kong itself, Taiwan, even though, we have all these things, he does not have that type of control. What he has is the type of control that scares the crap out of neoliberals and autocrats. He has the type that says that, well, we're all getting along and working really well together, so nobody wants this to fail. That's the type of leadership he has, and not him. It started a long time ago. It was, he inherited that from, I think, Deng, who opened up the markets, right, and brought in.
You're thinking of Deng Xiaoping.
Deng Xiaoping, yes, who opened up the markets, and then when the markets got too large, they brought in, Xi, who was more of a. So it's the same thing as their economics. It's planned, right? So they plan out who the leader is going to be. They have elections for local communities, and those elections turn into community leaders that grow and apply for party leadership, and they move up inside. So that by the time they get up into those leadership groups, the overarching decisions in the macro economy or in the macro government is just it's not as lockstep as we are. Like, funding education here. Why do we fund education with you only have this amount? That's not how China does it. China doesn't set an amount for an education program, doesn't set an amount for a province to build, doesn't set an amount. The province goes, yeah, this is what we need. And it's just there. They just take it and build with it. When things go wrong, the larger overarching government may come in and say, hey, things are not working out the way you thought, and may say you need to change your leadership, but they're not going to use financial means to constrain and control that or move it towards any kind of, like we do private companies.
And I tell you, I learned what I have about China because one of my friends that I've known for over 20 years came to America at like 12, and she could speak 3 languages when she came here, 3 or 4. And she started school with us when she was 13. And her mom married an American and they moved over here. And she still goes back frequently. But she graduated high school with us with honors. After having to learn, she only knew a little bit of English when she started in 8th grade. Graduated with honors. Got a bachelor's in economics, her master's in psychology, and then moved to the UK and got another degree, another economics degree over there while she was working. And she'd work for like 6 months out of the year, and then she'd go travel the world for the other 6 months. She's now living in, I don't think it's Norway, but one of those countries over there. And completely accomplished, set, everything, but she had such a good education when she came here that even the lacking of the American education, she was able to catch up real quick.
Yeah, I'm sure it was easy for her.
Yeah, but she was educated partly in the United States.
Yeah.
Okay, we're at 55 minutes now. Okay, I think we should take a look at the comments and see what people have had to say. But I also think we're not yet finished with this particular topic.
Oh, no.
And I would like to come back to it in part 3 next Thursday and maybe go more deeply into what's happening here in the United States, okay, to suggest that we are nearing the end, okay, of neoliberalism. And maybe,
I won't be able to make next week. I apologize, but I'll be better the following week.
is there something wrong with next week?
No. Yeah, next Thursday I have a vacation that I'm going with my wife, so we're going to be driving at the time.
Oh, okay.
So we'll have to get some signs, right? Put up some signs that say the end is near.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see you in 2 weeks then.
Yeah, for this one. Yeah, I can come next Tuesday.
For the international one, you can come next Tuesday, but for this one, in 2 weeks.
Yes, it will be.
Next week, I think we should still start talking about all the different things happening in this country, which suggest that we're coming near to the defeat, okay, of neoliberalism. Okay, let's go to the comments and see what folks have to say about the comments. Get there. Okay. Steve Wolfbrand couldn't find his red beret. He says it's got to be here somewhere. Steve Wolfbrand says Clinton was selling cocaine out of Arkansas.
He was. It wasn't he was selling it. He had allowed drug runners to run cocaine. Barry Seals was flying cocaine in from South America.
Okay, and he was taking a share of the profits?
Oh, I'm sure he got some money off of it. I mean, the state police and the FDA at one point had arrested Barry Seals while he was governor, and they were going to charge him with it, and he made the phone call and told them to let him go. And they freed him. And that was Bill Clinton's call. So I'm sure he got some money off of it, and they were running cocaine out of Colombia into our state. There's a lot of stories of, them dropping it off around the railroad tracks in the middle of the night. There was 2 boys that were murdered by potential drug runners, but also potentially the cops were involved too with that one.
I'd never put it past the Clintons. They are
Yeah.
murderous dudes.
Yeah.
So Steve Wolfbrand says 9/11 was an inside job.
Maybe. I don't know if it matters as much.
I think that we knew it was going to happen, and I think that we allowed it to happen as a way to take people's rights. Because I think with our foreign policy and all the countries we went after, none of them committed the acts. None of them were involved. But we didn't go after the countries where the people who were the hijackers came from.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve Wolfbrand says Bush Sr. killed JFK.
I don't know anything about that one.
I don't know anything about that one either. Building 7 didn't kill itself, okay, or Epstein. I don't know what those references are about.
Bush Sr. was involved in the murder of JFK. Yes, that seems to be maybe an issue.
Building 7 was
Prescott.
Also, Building 7, wasn't that one of the towers that fell?
Yeah, that didn't seem to fall.
Wasn't hit by a plane or got any damage from a plane?
I don't know. I don't.
Yeah, that was the one that supposedly, fell without any reason. It just disintegrated.
Just fell.
Yeah, the bomb was.
Yeah, they suspect the conspiracy is that it was bombed.
I see. And Robert Copeland says, look what happened in Tennessee today when they expelled 2 black Democrats from the state legislature and voted to keep a white lady in the state legislature. God damn.
Mm-hmm.
That was Steve Wolfbrand said, quote, surely you're not serious, unquote. I am serious. And stop calling me Shirley. I'm sorry, Steve. Who called you Shirley? Steve says, I want to occupy LA almost every day. I went to occupy LA almost every day. I loved it. So Robert Copeland says, and people are paying the price of the housing market crash in 2008. Now we are gentrification in a lot of the United States now. Steve Wolfbrand said, smash the like button. Thank you, Steve. Sandy Degg says, hello, shared. Steve Wolfbrand says, I was an essential worker. I managed to never catch COVID that I know of. Lots of vitamin D and zinc. We caught COVID recently. We do a lot of vitamin D also and other supplements, including seaweed, to ward off COVID. But we did catch it, but it was a very mild case. And this is our first day out of isolation. So we haven't been in good shape now for quite some time. And we seem to be fully recovered. Robert Copeland says, Bernie Sanders destroyed Biden in California. As I recall, yes, he destroyed Biden in California, but to my mind, there was rigging there too, because there was great discrepancy between exit polls and other polling. Okay, and what happened, basically he destroyed Biden, but it was more like a 2-to-1 margin. It should have been something like an 8-to-1 margin.
Yeah.
Sandy says, hi, Steve, Robert, and Brandy. Steve says, oh, sorry. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Sandy. Sandy has hand pink waving.
Emoji.
Yes, emoji. And Steve says, Sandy, where you been? Sandy's probably been on vacation. Steve says, smash the like button. Steve says, stop. Stop the sanctions. Yeah.
Yep.
Indeed, stop the sanctions. Every last one of them, and those sanctions, boy.
They only hurt the people.
They are devastating. They're
Mhm.
criminal. They're against international law. We got to stop it. It's
But
collective
it
punishment.
is causing neoliberalism's cracks, though.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, it is. It's certainly been making us weaker internationally.
Yeah.
Steve, I have been taking care of some medical stuff for myself, and my mother has had some medical issues. The doctor prescribed some medications that conflicted with each other, and it really messed her up. Yeah, we really have to be careful of that with doctors.
Yeah, that happened with my grandpa. And that's why we need one doctor who they all communicate with so that they can keep track of it. And also, anytime they add a new medication, I reach out to my other doctors, even my psychiatrist, and let her know. So, because I've seen that happen.
Yeah,
If
they
they're
have
not,
that kind of model at Kaiser. Your gateway doctor is your primary care physician,
Mhm.
and she, in the case of our gateway doctor, is aware of all the medications that are being prescribed by this one and that one, okay, and the other one,
Mhm.
and she keeps track of that and coordinates it. And we get to communicate with her very frequently, asking her this question, that question, and the other question, in order to make sure that all the prescriptions are coherent.
Yeah, but like in my area, we've got multiple hospitals, and so not all of my doctors are with one hospital because my cardiologist is with a different hospital than what my other doctors are in Fayetteville. My cardiologist is in Springdale. So he's with a completely different hospital.
So
So,
Sandy Degg says her new doctor discovered the mistakes yesterday and fixed her meds. So now hopefully all that stuff will get out of her system.
yeah.
Sandy says, no, but thank you, Steve. You are such a generous soul. Yeah, he is. And Robert Copeland says, Sandy, that may take time for your mom to get better.
Yeah.
Steve leaves 3 hearts for Sandy. Sandy says, I agree, Robert. She's 89. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
She lives with me so I can take care of her. I'm just really mad at her last doctor for not checking the medication to see if any of them conflicted with each other.
Mhm.
Sandy says he could have killed her. Steve says, Sandy, if you ever need me, I'm here for you. Sandy says, thank you, Steve. You're very kind. Steve says, Sandy, that offer stands. Sandy says, you're a good man, Steve. Steve says, my brother was a sheriff.
Mhm.
Steve says, my brother was a sheriff's deputy. He ran into the CIA several times. He was a narcotics detector. And Ghost starts waving with various emojis I can't see from here. Steve says the CIA sells drugs. Lana says, happy Thursday. I was on the phone, but hope everyone is well. We are well, Lana. This is the first day of ending COVID isolation for Bonnie and I. We went shopping, got some sorely needed food, and brought it into the house. And Ghost Start waves again. And Lana says, wow, Sandy, that's really awful. Yeah, it's awful. It was awful, but now it's better, I guess.
Yep.
So, everybody, I think we're at the end of the comments. Okay, next week in part 3, we focus more on the end of neoliberalism in the United States. Sandy says it's been a bumpy ride. Lana says shopping is good. Yeah, it was. It was very therapeutic. Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Okay,
Good
everybody.
night.
Good night. And thanks for coming.
Yes,
Right.
good night,
Thank you.
everybody. And please buy Joe a coffee.
Oh,
Yep.
Yes, please.
oh, thank you, Dee.
Good night.
Good night.
It's finally going to warm up here. Lana says had snow flurries and high winds yesterday. Yeah, I know you've been having a hell of a time with weather in Minnesota. Steve says, good night, fam. Good night, Steve. Lana says, good night. Sandy says, have a great night, everyone. Indeed, have a great night.